foreign predatory parasitic corporations are replacing our natural environment with an industrial landscape of wind turbines. One Nation will stand against sending children down a path of drug dependency and body mutilation to appease the gender cult. Leave our kids alone. The Trusted Digital Identity Bill is a global surveillance and control mechanism that profit-hungry corporations and power-mad politicians drafted and crafted. One Nation opposes this inhuman, dystopian future that the United Nations promotes as the Great Reset, and we condemn this Parliament for signing onto it. I called for Australia to reject the World Economic Forum's Great Reset and instead mount a great resist. Just like the koalas being euthanized to make way for wind turbines or damaged solar panels leaking toxic heavy metals into waterways, the United Nations net zero plan again involves killing the environment to save it. I've been speaking about the fear, the oppression and the inhuman cruelty of our COVID response since July 2020. I promised to hound down those responsible, and I will continue relentlessly to keep that promise. You're about to be live with me, Senator Malcolm Roberts. Hi. Last week's interactions with videos of Chris Bowen's wild and false claims got many strongly supportive comments. So we'll do more in the future. Not every week, but we've got a beauty in mind that will trigger climate alarmists. I think they'll freak out. Thank you, the Beagle. Thank you very much. You know, just a thought to consider. I raised it with one of our team today, one of our staff in the Senate office. And, you know, quite often election campaigns focus on what's wrong with everyone else and what we need to do. And outside of elections, politics is largely adversarial and very much an us versus them. So I've been thinking that most of the focus on politics tends to end up being in the negative. And, of course, newspapers sell more copies based upon fear and negative stories than on positive. So maybe it'd be more productive to build on the positives. So my aim is to focus on our country and our planet for humans to, well, actually, my aim is to restore our country and our planet for humans to abound and thrive. That's essentially what we're all about. I said it in my first speech. I'm very, very pro-human. And the world is being driven by globalists who are actually anti-human. And there's a reason for that, and we've discussed it at times. But I want to focus on restoring our country and our planet for humans to abound and thrive. I think that's what the duty of every human is, to make sure that our species abounds and thrives. So let's focus on our assets and building on these. For example, what do you appreciate about being in Australia? What do you appreciate about Australia itself? What do you appreciate about our species, humans? So this is something for people watching in from overseas. What do you appreciate about our species, humans? What opportunities do we face? What is our potential? What policies do we need to restore our country? I know of one for a start: get government out of people's lives. You know, government's role is to protect life, protect property, and to protect freedom. And then there are several keys to human progress. So I'd like to focus on the positives. So think more about any topics you'd like to cover in the future live streams. We try to do it every Friday. We don't always succeed because we're traveling and listening amongst constituents out in the regions and outside the office. Not many constituents in their office. Quick wrap of the week in politics. Pauline introduced our bill to prohibit vaccine mandates. So we actually did this for the second time. The first time was a couple of years ago, I think, yes, about 2022. And Pauline introduced it at the time. And we got, I think, 3 people in support of it: Pauline, me, and Ralph Babette. I think that was it. Anyway, this time we felt 4 short of getting a majority. So we're getting closer and closer. And I want to thank the Liberals for actually supporting our bill, and the Nationals for doing that, and a couple of the crossbenchers. But what a fuss it was. People, I won't tell you all the details, but one of the major parties left the room and had to abstain for a minute, and then the Labor Party ended up supporting us, and they actually went through. We had a division, we called for a division, and people have to go to each side, and the Labor Party was on our side. And then they suddenly realised, after the vote was counted and put in, they suddenly realised they'd done the wrong thing by their point of view, but the right thing by our point of view. And they said they wanted to recast the vote, so they did it again. And the Greens had a picnic laughing at their people. But actually, we laugh at the Greens, because the Greens used to be against big pharma, big corporations. Now they're pushing vaccines, they're pushing COVID injections, they're pushing big pharma. I don't know what's happened to them. They're not the Greens that they used to be, certainly not for civil liberties. So our bill to prohibit vaccine mandates ever again in the future, and remember, Commonwealth law runs over the top of everything, takes precedence over everything. That vaccine mandate bill fell far short of a majority. The Greens and Labor voted against it. The Liberals and Nationals voted with us for it. Senator Van abstained. I think some of the other crossbenchers, voted against it as well. I can't remember the actual numbers, the actual names rather. We had a motion debated, and that was to have a review of native title, and to put the first clause of it was to have a review of native title, because that is really hurting Aboriginals. It's holding Aboriginals back, because the whole thing about native title, in the 2.5-page preamble to the native title bill, 6 times it mentions UN instruments, agreements, declarations, and so it's really about a land grab, taking land off others and not handing it to the Aboriginals. We've done this in the past, this topic. We can do it again, but it's really important to understand the Aboriginals are worse off with native title, and so we want a review of it. It's been in place now for 31 years, so it's time for a review. It's time for a sunset clause, but the Liberals came to us, to their credit, and they said you can't really have a demand for a sunset clause without doing the review first. So if you take out the sunset clause, we'll vote for it. So they voted for the review, which is good. So we thank the Liberal Party and the National Party for supporting our motion to have a review of the Native Title Act. And by the way, under international law, if a country comes in and takes over another country, then they have to recognise the laws that existed beforehand. But if there's sovereignty there, now there was never sovereignty on Australia, the mainland of Australia. There was never Aboriginal sovereignty on our mainland. There was sovereignty and land tenure in some of the islands of the Torres Strait, and I'll explain what I mean. The Mabo decision was in favour of Eddie Mabo. It's called the Mabo decision. He raised the case. It was about Murray Island in Torres Strait Islands. The Murray Island, there was a system of land tenure. So you could keep people off your land if you had tenure on that land. You could also pass your land down to your successors, your descendants. So there's actually a system of land title. And so the High Court and the barrister in my office, he identified at the time, 30-odd years ago, that there would be a victory for Eddie Mabo, but it wouldn't go to the rest of the country, because the rest of the country, the mainland specifically, did not have a system of titles. We had nomadic tribes basically wandering around. They did not have a system of land titles, and they had no tenure to the land, no systems for passing down land to descendants, nor to keeping others off the land. So there was no land tenure, no title. When Paul Keating's Labor government implemented the Mabo decision, they just implemented it across the whole country, which was totally wrong. So we need a review of the Native Title Act to see how it's going and to see whether or not it's hurting or helping Aboriginals. My firm view, and listening to Aboriginal communities across Cape York and in the regional cities in Queensland, up and down the coast, and in Northern Territory, is that the native title is really hurting Aboriginals. It's about a land grab for the UN. And by the way, we're going to download from the speeches in the debate on Pauline's motion to review native title. We're going to present a couple to you. And we'll discuss the way that some senators debate or don't debate. You'll have a laugh. Anyway, that'll be in future weeks, not this week. We had the 3G shutdown inquiry, sent out an interim report. We got on the media with Ben Dobbins and ABC Queensland Country Hour. Very, very important issue. I've got some notes here, so I'll just race through that so that we can be efficient and not struggling around. So it was my motion for an inquiry into the 3G shutdown. that caused the inquiry. It was very revealing, and I want to acknowledge a Queenslander who contacted our office and asked if he should make a submission. And James Parker's submission was phenomenal. His testimony was phenomenal. So much so it made my work a lot easier, because I would just ask every witness, literally, have you seen James Parker's submission? Because it really got that on the record then. And he showed that there's still 1 million devices to be impacted when we shut down 3G, if it's shut down now. So originally it was scheduled to shut down 30th or 31st of this month. Not ready at all. They were still finding out a couple of weeks before the inquiry. The inquiry was only a couple of weeks ago. They were still finding out a couple of weeks before the inquiry that emergency phones in elevators were 3G. They didn't know it. So what's been happening is the communications department and the communications minister have just been letting this rip, letting Telstra and Optus just have free rein, do whatever they want. So James Parker's submission really highlighted it. There are many life-saving and productivity devices that are still going to be affected. Farm equipment, Royal Flying Doctor medicine fridges, pacemakers, health alarms, fire alarms, elevators, you name it. There's so many alarms that will not be able to work after 3G is shut down. And by the way, many 4G phones won't work because their system is based on the 3G network. It's a quirk that James Parker recognised right from the start would one day cause problems, and sure enough, he predicted it 5 or 6 years ago when 4G was introduced. So if we go ahead and shut down now, it'll gut the bush, because the telcos will not guarantee the same coverage. So what the telcos have done, they really were embarrassed by this inquiry. They don't know what they're doing, and they don't care, which is the worst thing. So what the telcos are doing is they're delaying their shutdown for 2 months. Big deal. In France, they've found so many problems with dropping 3G, excuse me, that they're delaying their shutdown of 3G till 2028, 4 years from now. That's how big a problem they see. And they're a fairly concentrated country and fairly high, much higher population density. Britain, I'm guessing Britain has an even higher population density and it is an even tinier country area-wise. They're still going to continue their 2G and 3G for many years, till late this decade. So they're doing it in a densely populated environment. There's no way we can do ours properly. It needs to be properly delayed, properly done with thresholds. I've suggested that the minister impose thresholds for giving guarantees in place so that the coverage is not only effective, but the emergency telephone system, which won't work when 3G is gone, even on some 4G phones, so that it's working everywhere. There's a lack of oversight from the department. As I mentioned, they only discovered emergency phones in elevators would be affected a month or so ago. The minister hasn't put a single condition. So the chair of our inquiry committee wrote to the minister and put out an interim report. So I want to thank Matt Canavan for that as chair, and also the secretariat, who've done phenomenal work in a very short period of time. Once they saw this nasty stuff coming out, being revealed in the inquiry, and people being hurt and people being vulnerable, the committee wrote to the minister and said, please defer, put a delay on the shutdown. So the telcos have put a 2 month delay on. But nonetheless, the minister still hasn't put a single condition on, despite the Senate inquiry recommendation to put guarantees in place. So she must intervene. So I'm asking Minister Rowland to put Australians before telco profits and intervene to secure the necessary service guarantees before the 3G shutdown. Australians must be guaranteed they will not lose coverage, and that devices will work, and that 4G phones can call 000. I mentioned that France has delayed its shutdown till 2028, and the United Kingdom, Britain, both their 2G and 3G will continue for quite a few years yet. Also, I want to compliment James Parker for raising a core issue. There are serious compatibility issues with the 4G system. There are serious standardization problems. There's a lack of standards across the telcos. And why that's done, and why they want to convert to off 3G, is to force people to buy new handsets. So it's a benefit financially in the short term for the telcos, Telstra, which is a multi-billion-dollar company, and Optus, which is a Singaporean-owned company, and the handset manufacturers, Apple, Google, etc. And that's just standardization and incompatibility issues. They can be fixed easily with a simple software fix. So that's really important to understand, where the Australian people, Optus and Telstra, are having a lend of us. We need to get the minister to stand up and be accountable, and hold Telstra and Optus accountable. Because, as I said, there are nearly 1 million devices that won't work if it's done right now. So the next thing on my notes, the CFMEU administrator. What a farce that was. They're still not settled. And I congratulate the Liberal Party for having the guts to stand up on this one, because the bill that the Labor Party put forward, and remember, the CFMEU donates millions of dollars to the Labor Party's campaigns. The Labor Party is dependent on the wedded to the CFMEU donations, and also the donations from some of the super funds. So there's a real conflict of interest here. But the Minister Watt, from the Minister for Workplace Relations and Employment, who introduced the bill into the Senate for appointing a CFMEU administrator, only for the General and Construction Division. That's all. It's got so many holes in it. It's so vague. It gives the minister so many powers. He even wants the power to make regulations and not have the regulations disallowable by the Senate. So right now you've got legislation going through the Parliament, and some of that legislation can't cover every aspect. So they give the minister the right and the power to make regulations more specific according to the circumstances. But the Parliament has scrutiny over those regulations, because if we don't like it, then we can disallow it. If they're within 15 days of regulations being introduced, if we don't like them, we can disallow them if the majority of the Senate so decides. But in this case, the bill specifically says no disallowance. And the terms are so vague, and it's got so many situations where the minister may do this, may do something else. The minister can determine whether or not the administrator is appointed, how quickly he's dissolved, his position is gone. I mean, it's just not suitable. So there are serious issues that we've got with it, and I'm glad that the Liberals continued to stand up and join the Greens in refusing to support a guillotine. Labor was wanting to cut short debate yet again. But this time, the Greens wanted to not support the debate being cut short, not guillotine it, which was unusual, because the Greens quite often have supported their mates in the Labor Party. But this time, the Greens see their mates in the CFMEU as needing more protection than their mates in the Labor Party. Next thing that's come up during this week is Dave Pellow, who's the head of Church and State. A wonderful, wonderful man, has received a formal complaint that was made to the Queensland Human Rights Commission. Apparently, Dave did something terrible. He didn't do a welcome to country at a Christian event advertised as being Christian on private property. Apparently, one of the people who registered, of his own choice, decided to come to the Church and State, and didn't like the fact that Dave didn't do a welcome to country. So we'll talk more about feelings in a minute. But Dave is now being hauled before the Queensland Human Rights Commission. And this is ridiculous, because Dave loves all people, regardless of race, gender, religion, attitudes. He loves all people. He's a true Christian. Let's come back to feelings. Feelings come from within. They're not externally driven. What I might do might trigger feelings in you, but that's because of your mind, your judgments, your approach to your view of what I just did or didn't do. Feelings come from within you. It is not possible to give offence. It is only possible to take offence. I cannot give offence to anyone, but someone can take offence at me, because they make up their mind as to what as their view of what I'm doing. Feelings depend upon their view. Two people might see the same event and one have a completely different view, so they both have completely different feelings about it. One might be happy, one might be angry, one might be sad, one might be scared, one might be frightened, one might be energized. So it's not the person doing the event that's responsible for the feelings. And that's the problem with these feelings-based decisions, that they're complete rubbish. So if someone feels a bit insecure about or whatever, or angry or whatever they're feeling based upon their view about Dave not doing a welcome to country, that's their business. It's on their head. So anyway, Dave is not taking this lightly. He's defending democracy because this is about destroying Christianity, and Christianity is recognized in the first paragraph of our Constitution. Christianity is the birthplace of Western civilization. The Jewish religion and Christianity basically together form the birthplace of Western civilization. Christ taught us about truth. Christ taught us about love. And so what we've got to understand is that this is not just an attack on Dave. He's just the target. The real target is behind him. It's Christianity, it's family, it's our democracy, it's Western civilization. So Dave's not taking things lightly. He's having a telethon next Tuesday from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. Defending Democracy Telethon is what he's calling it. I'll give you more details at the end of the live stream. But please tell your friends. I want to also point out a wonderful man that came along to our session last Friday, our forum at Clayfield Electorate, hosted by Michelle and Michelle Wild, our candidate in Clayfield. He's the man who came along. He gave me a document. It's about 4 pages long. He's put some thought into it. You know, he's an Iranian. He was an Iranian, sorry. He's an Aussie now. And he's saying basically people from so many countries come here because they want what we have to offer. They want the benefits of our society. Then they come here and want to change it. And he said, we're too soft in saying and bowing to their wishes. And I agree with him. We should be standing up for our culture, standing up for our laws, standing up for our traditions. And here's a man coming into this country and wanting to protect the country and saying we should be far harder on immigrants who don't want to obey our laws. He did a wonderful job. I might do something with that. That speech he's drafted. I also did an adjournment speech on government cancelling freedom. And that was specifically aimed at the UK riots in Britain. So we'll move on today because that's what I want to talk about. We have had, and we still have, a relentless campaign in One Nation in supporting freedom. The COVID mismanagement, the COVID deceit, the COVID lies, the inhuman treatment of people, the homicide, killing people that resulted from the mismanagement of COVID, specifically through untested gene therapy-based injections. They weren't vaccines. So the COVID, we called for a misinformation, disinformation seminar, conference, summit here in Brisbane. We organised that in our party, got speakers from around Australia, prominent speakers to talk about it, constitutional experts, legal experts, media experts. Because the misinformation bill, well, let's have a look at all these issues that we're supporting freedom on. The COVID mismanagement, that was a joint Labor-Liberal effort, the Uni Party at work. Liberal federally, Labor in most of the state electorates. Oh, and wasn't it great to see Daniel Perrottet, what's his name, Perrottet, anyway, former Premier of New South Wales, actually apologised to the people for the COVID injection mandates. They should not have been forced, he now admits. At least he's had the courage. But how come he can only do it on his way out of politics? Surely a politician should be able to make an apology. But anyway, he has made an apology, and that's good. So we opposed the Uni Party there on COVID and mismanagement. The misinformation, disinformation bill was introduced by the Liberals under Morrison and Littleproud. It was then reintroduced to the Parliament for a vote, and then withdrawn once they saw. Once it was reintroduced by Albanese and Michelle Rowland, the communications minister, and then it was quietly sent to a committee once they saw our continued hostility towards it. It's a censorship bill. It's not a misinformation, disinformation bill. The government is exempt. The mouthpiece media, the globalist media, the Big Brother media are exempt. You and I would be hit if the misinformation, disinformation bill gets up. It's a censorship bill. It's a Uni-Party bill. The digital ID was introduced by the Morrison-Littleproud government, and then voting was introduced without debate by the Labor Party Greens alliance in the Senate. And whose comment there I just saw? Yes, worse, Waldo. We want accountability, not an apology. Right on. Right on. The Digital ID Bill was introduced by Morrison and Littleproud, Liberal Nationals. It was then reintroduced by Albanese and the Greens in the Senate, where they had a guillotine, no debate at all. And it went through, and despite our protests, and so that is another uniparty bill, Liberal Labor uniparty bill. The United Nations World Health Organization, international health regulations. I came out publicly. I was probably one of the first in the world, definitely the first in Australia to do so, to come out and oppose it. We made videos that went around the world. The African nations stood up because they're tired of having their people treated as guinea pigs and being murdered by big pharma on trials that humans should not be subjected to. The international health regulations and the so-called pandemic treaty were squashed as a result of many people's efforts. World Economic Forum, which on the Liberals and Labor Party, Uniparty just supported the international health regulations, and the Labor health minister wants to continue trying to get them up. World Economic Forum policies have been introduced, just like the UN policies have been introduced by Liberal and Labor. The Uniparty and One Nation totally opposes Paris Agreement, wants to pull out of the Paris Agreement, pull out of Net Zero, pull out of the Kyoto Protocol and the other UN agreements. So what we're seeing now is that the issues that we have been fighting and the freedom that we have been protecting, it's now entering the mainstream media, the mouthpiece media, the globalist media, the Big Brother media. Now, I'm not a fan of the mouthpiece media, in case you don't realize, in case you haven't been following me for a couple of years. I'm not a fan of the mouthpiece media. We call them out. But I do support some honest journalists in a few publications. The Wall Street Journal, I think, continues to be an exceptionally good paper. It's based on facts. It's based on data. I used to really enjoy reading that when I lived in America. I think it still maintains its very high standards after Murdoch bought it. Rupert Murdoch bought it, News Corp. I don't get to read it much. The Australian in this country quite often provides both views on serious issues facing us, climate, for example, COVID. And I want to single out two people. Robert Gottliebson, as a journalist, is phenomenal. His article entitled "Family Business Decline Threatens Rates," that's interest rates, of the 12th of August, which was last Monday, is absolutely astounding. It is a very short, succinct, extremely well-written, easy-to-read summary of what is going on in our country. It is absolutely beautiful. Well, what's happening is scary. I sent a copy of the article to Graham Hood from Club Grubbery. He and I are mates, and he's a really decent guy. And he said, yeah, we're basically stuffed. But I don't see that I don't see us as being stuffed, because we've got some good people that can turn it around. And so long as people like Robert Gottliebson are writing about the issues, then we've got it. He talks about the importance of productivity, how government is screwing the country. And he's not talking about just the Labor Party, he's talking about the Liberal Party as well. Government in this country has been destroying productivity, which is fundamental for wage rises, fundamental for standard of living, fundamental for lower cost of living. And that's why cost of living is getting so high, because they're destroying productivity. That's a really good article. Robert Gottliebson, Family Business Decline Threatens Rates. Now, we get on to the topic that I want to discuss. Adam Crichton, his article entitled "UK Crackdown on Language Turns Free Speech on Its Head," 15th of August. He's the News Corporation, the Australian's USA correspondent. And I must say that truth has many enemies, but it's fundamental to good governance. And Jesus introduced the concept of truth as essential. That was a Christian concept, and Buddha and some of the other Eastern religions also or philosophies had that tenet as well. Christianity also introduced freedom as a universal human right, unlimited except for infringement on others' rights. So I can be free to do whatever I want so long as I don't impinge upon you. Adam Crichton has shown his credentials for protecting freedom because He understands free enterprise is the way to go. We don't have free enterprise at the moment anywhere, but anywhere in the world. But he also has been strong about COVID from the start. I want to emphasize that. So this week, he wrote an article on the UK censorship and the unfounded jailing and two-tier police enforcement of laws. And I've got a video for you to watch and to critique. So let's start with Adam's article, and then we'll go into the video, and let's try and have your comments, make it interactive. Then we'll move on to the Sky News video embedded in Adam's article in the Australian newspaper, and get your comments there too. Now, Sky News is a mixed bag. I'm not necessarily endorsing it. They've got some wonderful presenters and producers on there and talent on their shows, and some outright socialists. And I think Sky News is compromised somewhat because they're a TV broadcast and they can't get into topics in detail. Then we'll do Q&A if there's still time left. And then we're going to leave with my speech on this issue, because I actually did a speech before Adam's article came out on this issue, the UK protesters and the two-tiered police system in the UK, enforcement and other issues affecting freedom in Britain. So here's Adam Crichton's article. I just pull it up in front of me. So he starts by saying, the British courts jailed a 61-year-old Sutton man, David Spring, for 18 months on Tuesday, according to your local Guardian newspaper, for yelling, "Who the F is Allah?" and calling police officers the C word at an anti-immigration protest near Downing Street in July. It came out in court that the retired train driver, now mainly a carer for his sick wife, was contrite and embarrassed by his behaviour, but not enough to avoid jail time in what is a ludicrous, obscene infringement of what should be the man's fundamental rights. He should be free to say what he thinks. I mean, if anyone is going to get upset with him swearing or him saying who the F is Allah or the C word, surely the police are beyond that. 18 months jail? What's happening in Europe? What's happening in the UK? The riots and protests across Britain, I'll continue with Adam Crichton, the riots and protests across Britain last month and this month that centred on extreme immigration, have triggered a raft of shocking arrests and incarcerations of ordinary Britons for their opinions and social media posts, including of one elderly man who barely understood what he was being arrested for in his home by two police officers. So speaking up in Britain is now a crime, and you can get 18 months in jail. Even if some British people now feel safer from hurt feelings, Adam mentions, it has been a deserved public relations disaster for Britain, especially in the United States, where mockery and condemnation of the UK have gone through the roof, particularly after one senior British police officer threatened to extradite Americans for posting offensive material. The fact that they're comfortable with finding, this is Joe Rogan saying this, Adam Crichton quotes Joe Rogan, the fact that they're comfortable with finding people who've said something that they disagree with and putting them in a effing jail cage in England in 2024 is really wild, said Joe Rogan, a supporter of Bernie Sanders and Robert F. Kennedy. So he's on both sides of politics, but he said that as America's most popular podcaster. We all know Joe Rogan. Ex-owner Elon Musk has urged his 189 million followers to support freedom of speech in the UK as part of a barrage of memes and mockery of British rough justice, echoed by countless influencers across the political spectrum. It is indeed shocking to see a country once at the vanguard of individual liberty, the birthplace of Western civilization, the birthplace in Europe of Western civilization, so zealously arrest its own people over intemperate, rude or intolerant remarks, often made in their own homes, so you can speak out in your own home and get into trouble. Seen by relatively few people, so not many people are going to be affected at all, and therefore falling far short of the clear, present and imminent danger required in the US at least for incitement to violence charges. So this goes against basics, fundamentals of human freedom and democracy. Earlier this year, British pundit, listen to these figures, Konstantin Kisin told former Nationals leader John Anderson, apparently on a podcast, Britain had arrested more than 3,000 individuals for online posts in a single year, compared with 400 in Russia, which has about 2.5 times the population. So look at the ratio there, 3,000 in a year arrested in Britain, 400 arrested in Russia, with far more people in the population of Russia. So the equivalent would be about 150 in Russia if they had the same population as Britain. So what's that? That's 1/20th. 1/20th the rate they're being hauled away in Britain, arrested for what they say. Whatever the exact figures, it's suggestive of how the West is becoming more censorious than even traditional authoritarian regimes. In China, online wrongthink attracts a demerit from one's social credit score. Perhaps that's where Britain is heading once its jails become too full of working-class racists. And the racist is inverted commas, because they're not racist. They're protesting against the crime on their street. Remember those 3 girls got murdered by someone with a knife? They're protesting against the immigration coming in, record levels of immigration. And they can see the damage it's doing to the country. And Adam Gray goes on to say, Australia is surely on the same path, given it was legal to arrest a pregnant woman in her home in Victoria for posting on Facebook her understandable disdain for destructive multi-month pandemic lockdowns. I told you Adam Crichton was on this from the start. One of the very few journalists who had the courage to say what he thought and what the data showed. He questioned the injections, he questioned the lockdowns, he questioned the economic impact of lockdowns, he questioned the health impact of lockdowns, he questioned the masks' impact on health, he questioned the efficacy of the mask. Adam was questioning everyone. And by the way, if you think about the Western democracies, the Anglo democracies, there's Britain, Labour red, Tories blue. There's New Zealand, Labour red, Nationals blue. There's Canada, the Liberals, so-called Liberals, red. There's the Conservatives, blue. In America, they've actually swapped them, and the Republicans are blue and the Democrats are red. In Australia, we've got the Labor Party red and the Liberals blue. All 5 of the major Anglophile countries have got red-blue uniparties. All of them. They all behave very similarly with control towards their own citizens, rather than serving their own citizens during the COVID mismanagement and deceit. So he goes on. Adam Crichton goes on. The poorly written laws that permit such arrests in Britain, such as the 2003 Communications Act, which makes it illegal to send any message on an electronic messaging system, even among private chat groups, that is, quote, grossly offensive or indecent, obscene or menacing, or false, for the purpose of causing annoyance, inconvenience, or needless anxiety to another, have been around for some time. A generation ago, police and governments were wiser, realizing that jailing or censoring people for their beliefs would only draw attention to the remarks and stoke further political resentment, which is what has happened in Britain. What has changed is the culture, an obsession among elite policymakers. Just imagine this, mainstream media calling elite policymakers and some journalists with stamping out, quote, misinformation and disinformation. Words that were barely heard a decade ago when right, wrong, lying and propaganda were sufficient, and purifying public, even private debate of any remarks deemed politically incorrect. You can't do this in private now in Britain. This is where this is heading. And all of those 5 red and blue uniparty governments that I mentioned, New Zealand, Canada, Australia, Britain and America, all 5 of them push globalist policies. That's why we need Trump to come in America. But they're all pushing globalist policies. This is a globalist world. It's a uniparty world. He continues, I'll skip a couple of paragraphs. In a world where much of the mainstream media outlets are increasingly biased, this is from the mainstream media, it's even more important that ordinary people can have their say unimpeded, despite the offence or wrongness they generate. I'm going to read that again. In a world where much of the mainstream media outlets are increasingly biased, it's even more important that ordinary people can have their say unimpeded, despite the offence or wrongness they generate. Go at 'em. That's spot on. I'll skip a couple more paragraphs. Many of us flippantly like to say, we're in a free country. But increasingly, that's not so, despite all the well-funded human rights outfits. It's because of the human rights outfits that we're losing our freedoms. Too few, Adam goes on, too few people realize democracies are capable, wittingly or unwittingly, of doing stupid, even evil things. We've seen that. And trampling over rights that earlier generations have taken for granted. We've seen that. The idea governments themselves, often the biggest purveyors of misinformation, are well placed to police the truth or the limits to taking offence is egregiously wrong-headed. Right and wrong are slippery concepts, best left to civil society to sort out. Let bigoted sentiments be called out by more and better speech. In other words, if someone tells a lie, even if you know it's a lie, you don't have to go in and censor the person who's lying. Just let the public work it out. The best defense of truth is to leave truth alone and let it get on with exposing itself as the truth. When we censor people, we don't hear what the truth is. We are left to hear what the people censoring believe is the truth. Truth always prevails eventually. So we need to make sure truth is left free to sprout. Let truth speak. It's the best antidote to lies. And then we see this going in America. Americans who don't like, this is Adam again, Americans who don't like what they see in Britain should beware a Harris-Walz administration. Tim Walz has just been picked by Kamala Harris as her running mate as vice president in the presidential elections. This is what Tim Walz said on MSNBC last week. There's no guarantee to free speech on misinformation or hate speech. Wow. And especially around our democracy. A democracy, relying upon controlling speech. Democrat vice presidential candidate Tim Walz told MSNBC last week in what ironically was itself misinformation. There most certainly is, as numerous Supreme Court verdicts have declared. That's Adam saying that. At least Britain's spate of arrests for offensive statements and memes has drawn attention to the dwindling rights of the individual across Western nations, as an increasingly culturally remote ruling class seeks to impose its values on everyone else. As an increasingly culturally remote ruling class seeks to impose its values on everyone else. That's what's happening in our country. Your country, my country. Big Brother is watching exactly, Bruce. So let's continue now. Now you've got to do some work here. We'll get on to the Sky News video that was embedded in Adam Crichton's link. And then you can do some analysis.
That 1 in 3 Brits support the current protests to some degree, but only 7% support the escalation of these protests into violence. The riots are, of course, deplorable, but do they reflect widespread frustration with the uncontrolled migration?
I think it's more than that, Gabriella. I think it's really the underlying cause is 14 years of the Tory elite, the posh boys, if you will, that really didn't take their electorate seriously, didn't really listen to them, failed on all of their promises, gaslit everybody during that process to how well they were doing, how hard they were working for us, and what great results they were getting when any fool could see that they weren't delivering what they had promised and that the country was going to the dogs. And when that was followed by 3 weeks of labor pretty much showing that it's not going to be much different, in fact, probably worse, by also going off on a really serious left-wing woke rant about free speech and showing a very open door policy to unlimited immigration. That's where the immigration comes into it. I just think your average British bloke said enough is enough. You know, I love this country because it's so tolerant. We have the greatest eccentrics in the world here. You can live with your eccentricities in Britain and people just let you get on with it. And they're even quite amused. But when the Brits have had enough and they blow, oh, there's no going back. And that's what's happening now.
So let's just go over some of those things. I've got some notes in front of me. The underlying cause, in Dr. Roger Dewald's opinion, the underlying cause of the unrest is 14 years of the Tory elites, who are no different from the Labour elites. The posh boys, he said. that really didn't take their electorate seriously, didn't really listen to them, failed on all of their promises, gaslit everybody during that whole process. Sound familiar? The country was going to the dogs. Sound familiar? And when that Tory 14 years was followed by 3 weeks, this is what he said, 3 weeks of Labor, pretty much showing that it's not going to be much different. In fact, probably worse. They certainly are worse when it comes to controlling people. By also going off on a really serious left-wing woke rant about free speech and showing up a very open-door policy to unlimited immigration. Same thing's happening in our country. That's where the immigration comes into it. I just think your average British bloke said enough is enough. This is what happens when governments lie, not only when they're not doing their job, but when they're pretending to do their job, doing the opposite, but they're doing the opposite in reality. So let's continue with Sky News.
Different, in fact, probably worse, by also going off on a really serious left-wing woke rant about free speech and showing a very open door policy to unlimited immigration. That's where the immigration comes into it. I just think your average British bloke said enough is enough. You know, I love this country because it's so tolerant. We have the greatest eccentrics in the world here. You can live with your eccentricities in Britain and people just let you get on with it, and they're even quite amused. But when the Brits have had enough and they blow, there's no going back, and that's what's happening now.
I'm also hearing reports of people choosing to leave London at the moment. We'll wait and see what happens. But let's take a look at some counter-protesters that have been filmed. This person was filmed appearing to be carrying a knife.
The activist I spoke to has been able to access one of the far-right Telegram groups, and he saw on that a suggestion that there might be a far-right protest in this part of Birmingham around this time.
Roger, it's just terrifying.
And that picture, that video, which has gone viral, almost every time it appears carries the caption that the police were not far away and did nothing about it. This is the two-tier policing that they're complaining about. I mean, can you imagine somebody standing around with a weapon like that and a policeman seeing it and not doing something? Now, if that had been a white Brit in a T-shirt and a pair of jeans, he probably would have been clunked over the head and arrested.
So I'll just go over what Dr. Roger Gewalt said again. This is the two-tier policing system that they're complaining about. British who are deeply upset about their kids being murdered, about high immigration and what's happening to their country and their culture and their laws. They're complaining about this. Okay, some of them have protested violently, and no one condones violence. No one has supported the violence, the demonstrators, some of the demonstrators. But some people are protesting peacefully, and you see the police locking them up, speaking peacefully, saying what they think, people locking them up, police locking them up. But someone carrying an assault knife, and the police nearby, nothing happens to him. Just remarkable. We'll continue.
Keir Starmer chaired another emergency meeting and he vowed that those involved will feel the full force of the law. Here he is.
Over 400 people now have been arrested, 100 have been charged, some in relation to online activity, and a number of them are already in court. And I'm now expecting substantive sentencing before the end of this week. But the message has to go to those who are involving themselves in this disorder, which is you're wrong, you shouldn't be doing it, and you will feel the full force of the law, as I hope we've been able to demonstrate with these swift prosecutions.
Roger, what's your assessment of how the Prime Minister has been handling this?
Very poorly, I think, is mine and the general assessment. I'd like to see a breakdown of the statistics of the 400 people who've been arrested, just what camps they're actually in, because I think there's, as widely reported, a tremendous prejudice, as I say, against your average working class Brit who he's characterizing as a far-right thug. And as to immigrants and other people not of original British origin, I think they're being quite lenient. He's also starting to make noises that are very threatening about free speech, it seems. Certainly some laws have been passed that affect free speech as it was protected in universities. And I saw something this evening that you can actually be arrested if you pass on a video on the socials that they don't like. That if you pass on something that involves what's going on, that can be classed as a crime. They can knock on your door and arrest you, apparently. I don't have the details, but there was some allusion to that. And it's scary. It's very much like in Australia, where Albo made a speech the other day, really not dissimilar from Keir Starmer's, and it was followed by, I can't remember, one of his colleagues who said, unbelievably, like 1984, now, if you know anybody, among your acquaintances who is talking and expressing extreme views, please call this national security hotline number. I mean, it was unbelievable. So both places are it looks like they're cramping down on free speech.
Okay.
Well, that colleague of Anthony Albanese was a parliamentary colleague. It was Peter Dutton. I'm going to read a quote from Peter Dutton's speech. Let me just get it up here. Here's the interview of Peter Dutton, and here's Peter Dutton's, and then Peter Dutton's response. So the interviewer's question of Peter Dutton, quote, "We saw the terror threat raised to probable yesterday." That was Anthony Albanese raised the terror threat to probable. "There are multiple fronts now. One of those has come out of COVID conspiracy theorists, anti-vaxxers. What does it say to you about government overreach and government essentially controlling people's lives and the effects that can have?" I'm going to say that again. What does it say to you about the probable threat? What does it say to you about government overreach and government essentially controlling people's lives and the effects that can have? Peter Dutton's answer, quote, "None of that should give rise to the sort of conduct that you're referring to. I would say to anybody in our community, in your family group, where you see somebody's behavior changing, regardless of their motivation, or if they've changed radically, their thoughts about society and government, you need to report that information to ASIO or to the Australian Federal Police as a matter of urgency." End of quote. If they've changed radically their thoughts about society and government. Well, I used to be pleased with, in my ignorance, with the federal parliament and the prime ministers. Now, in the lead up to getting into the Senate and being in the Senate, I'm appalled at the way our society is misgoverned, at the way we ceded our sovereignty. Does that make me a radical? I don't think so. It makes me someone who's awoken. So let me continue with the facts about the High Court. In 1997, in the legal case Lange versus Australian Broadcasting Corporation, the High Court, quote, found, quote, "Under a legal system based on the common law, everybody is free to do anything except subject only to the provisions of the law, so that one proceeds upon an assumption of freedom of speech and turns to the law to discover the established exceptions to it." In other words, the High Court is saying everyone has freedom of speech, except where there is a specific law that says you can't say something. We have freedom of speech in this country. Some people have said correctly that freedom of speech isn't mentioned in our Constitution. That's because the Founding Fathers just assumed it was natural. But the High Court, constitutional experts have told me, enshrines freedom of speech. And there it is. The High Court certainly does. Now, to protect human life, free speech stops at incitement to violence against others and an incitement to break the law. Fine. Free speech does not stop, as Peter Dutton suggests, merely at the criticism of others. So I'll read Peter Dutton's response again. quote, none of that should give rise to the sort of conduct that you're referring to. I would say to anybody in our community, in your family group, where you see somebody's behavior changing, and regardless of their motivation, or if they've changed radically, their thoughts about society and government, you need to report that information to ASIO or to the Australian Federal Police as a matter of urgency. That is our opposition leader, the Liberal Party. Stunning, absolutely stunning that someone could say that in a democracy like Australia. And let's go back to Dr. Roger Gewald on the Sky News. Because I think there's, as widely reported, a tremendous prejudice, as I say, against your average working class Brit or Aussie, who is characterising, Starmer is characterising as a far-right thug. That's what these people in government do. When they're scared, they start using labels. When they don't have the data or they want to tell a lie, they start using labels. A far-right thug. A decent working family man protesting about children being murdered on the street, about excessive immigration that's destroying his very country, being labelled a far-right thug because he dares speak up or because he dares take part in a protest, even peaceful one. And as to migrants and other people not of our original British origin, I think they're being quite lenient. So they have a two-tier police system. One for the working man in Britain, come down hard, and for those not of British origin, lenient. People don't like double standards. People don't like their leaders lying to them. When they've been caught out and they suddenly see a change come in and the Labor Party come in after 14 years of the Tory elites, and we see the Labor elites looking down their noses at them, people get upset. We don't condone violence, but we say that the cause of this lies in the shoddy governance of our countries. And then Gewalt goes on. He's also starting to make noises that are very threatening about free speech, it seems. And then he said, and I saw something this evening that you can actually be arrested if you pass on a video on the socials that they don't like. I've had some videos on my YouTube removed. I think it's around about 39. YouTube have removed them. One of them has been up for a year. They've changed their algorithms, so they've gone. The videos, as far as we can tell, that have disappeared from YouTube have been about COVID injections, and calling for COVID Royal Commission. A senator, legally, duly elected to represent the people of his state and the people of his country, is silenced because he calls for a Royal Commission into homicides, tens of thousands of homicides. That's what we've got in the red and blue countries, thanks to the globalists. Then Dr. Roger Gewald goes on, that if you pass on something that involves what's going on, in other words, showing what's going on, that can be classed as a crime. And he goes on, and it was followed by, I can't remember one of a colleague who said, well, we've already talked about that. That was Peter Dutton. Unbelievably, like 1984, the book 1984, George Orwell's 1984. If you know anybody you know among your acquaintances who is talking and expressing extreme views, please call this national security hotline number. Not just extreme views, he's changed his views. This is absurd. This is not Australia. This is Australia under the Uni Party. So let's continue.
Different, in fact, probably worse, by also going off on a really serious left-wing woke rant about free speech and showing a very open door policy to unlimited immigration. That's when they started to dump stocks there.
We just jumped out of place there. Hang on, we're getting close to it. Bring on Nigel.
I think they're being quite lenient. He's also starting to. If you pass on something that involves what's going on, that can be classed as a crime. They can knock on your door and arrest you. Apparently, I don't have the details, but there was some allusion to that. Acquaintances who is talking and expressing extreme views, please call this national security hotline number. I mean, it was unbelievable. So both places are it looks like they're cramping down on free speech.
Okay, I'll look into those reports that you're referring to. Let's talk about Nigel Farage, because he's had to ramp up his security after being blamed for the violent riots. Here he is.
Personally, I have to say I'm pretty disgusted by comments made by people like Andy McDonald from the Labour Party, Anna Soubry, former Conservative MP, broadcasters like James O'Brien on LBC, calling these Farage's riots. People saying, actually, I've been orchestrating, organising, encouraging the riots. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. And because of that level of incitement to hatred against me, I've had to have a very significant change in my security situation over the course of the weekend.
Roger, it is so concerning. Where do you see this going?
I think there's two things involved with Nigel Farage, Gabriella. I mean, first of all, it's very convenient for his political opponents to be able to attack the success that the Reform Party is having with the electorate by conflating them with what's going on out in the streets. And because they are opposed to unlimited illegal immigration, claiming that they are the cause of these riots. Put the two and two together, it's kind of like proving that you don't, you don't beat your partner or whatever that old saw is. And then, of course, the other thing, there are a lot of people that don't like Nigel because he is very confrontational and controversial. And again, this is a good excuse to attack him for that. But I don't think many people can point to much direct evidence of anything that Nigel or Reform has done that have caused these riots, other than to be against, illegal immigration. But, so are most of the people in the streets, it would seem.
I want to talk to you about the stock market, because stock market...
There you go. Let's go back over that. Nigel Farage said, personally, I have to say I'm pretty disgusted by comments made by people like Andy McDonald from the Labour Party, Anna Soubry, former Conservative MP, broadcasters like James O'Brien on LBC calling these Farage's riots. They're scared of Nigel. They're scared of his success, as Dr. Roger Duwald said. Labour Party, Conservatives, red, blue, and the mouthpiece media blaming Farage, and he had nothing to do with them, nothing to do with the riots at all. So they're afraid of him. He's getting quite a bit of traction and got a huge vote for him. Didn't get the members of parliament that he deserved for the numbers to reflect the number of votes, but they can still see he's building a solid base. So the Labels come out to attack him. A racist, inflamer of violence, etc. Lies. And then Dr. Roger Duwald says they attack the success that the Reform Party is having with the electorate. So the electorate is very upset with with the Conservatives and Labor in Britain, and they're swinging to the Reform Party, and so they attack the Reform Party with lies. Lies are a form of control, and always beneath control there is fear. These people are afraid of Nigel Farage. And then Duwald goes on and says, and because they are opposed to unlimited immigration, claiming they are the cause of these riots. See, it's just another lie. Farage is opposed to unlimited immigration because that's what the people of the country want. They want limited migration, not unlimited migration. But I don't think, and then Duwald says, but I don't think many people can point to much direct evidence of anything that Nigel or Reform has done that have caused these riots other than to be against, illegal immigration. But so are most of the people in the streets, it would seem. So Farage is listening, reflecting what the people in the street are saying, people across the country are saying, and so he gets pilloried. That's the same as the way they treated Pauline Hanson. They feared her. She shot overnight in Queensland from not even present in the Queensland election in 1998 to 23% of the vote with 11 members of parliament. They feared her. And Liberal and Labor, Liberal Prime Minister John Howard, Labor Premier Peter Beattie, colluded with each other, and she got locked up. They attacked her. They changed the voting system slightly to make it more favourable to themselves. They labelled her. They called her what would be the worst thing you can call an Australian woman, a racist. She's not a racist. The party she formed was One Nation, the opposite of race. Race divides and calls one superior to the other. She said everyone should be the same in being treated as equal opportunity and treated the same in one nation, not separate flags, not separate races, not separate territories. One nation, one community, one flag. That's what she said from the start. So they labelled her because they were afraid of it. That was successful in marginalising her. Go and read her maiden speech, as I did. There's not a single racist word in it. She wants to end the division based on race. So that's the way they work. So let's go back to Sky News. Dave Pello, I'll just summarise again. Telethon, Tuesday night, 7 o'clock till 10 o'clock. Let me just get the title back for you. I'm sorry I didn't have that properly. Defending Democracy Telethon, Tuesday night, coming 7 to 10 p.m. I'll be speaking on that. It's a fundraising for a Human Rights Law Alliance. Let's raise a hell of a lot of money so that they can protect innocent people like Dave, who are just simply following their religion and following peaceful protests and statements against things that they don't believe in. Go to www.churchandstate, that's church and A-N-D, state.com.au. Dave Pello will, as soon as possible, put the details of the telethon on the front page of that website, www.churchandstate.com.au. The urgency is critical. It's crucial. Now, Dave arranges conferences around Australia, but he's jumping into this telethon with very little time. So please support Dave. Please support the Human Rights Law Alliance to fight more cases. We've had people like Bernie Gaynor standing up for us, and it's cost him hundreds of thousands of dollars, family of 9 children, and he's been taken to court repeatedly on what I think are vexatious charges. Okay, that's plenty of talk. So let's do Q&A for a few minutes, and then I'll leave you with an adjournment speech. Any questions? You're welcome, Believe in Yourself. What a great name. All the parties are corrupt, says someone. I just missed. Don't vote for any of them. No, if you don't vote for any of them, you're basically perpetuating Liberal, Labor, uni-party rule. Vote for the minor parties, and then put the majors down low. Greens last. Okay, Surrealism says, most of the wind and solar corporations are multinational investment funds, their version of super funds, that are trying to profit from our wealth. Spot on. Most of them are foreign, multinational investment funds. Many of them are Chinese corporations, possibly and likely owned by the Chinese Communist Party. Several of the solar and wind subsidies are going to Australian billionaires, who I think are behaving parasitically off the generosity and the care, the deluded care of many, many fine Australians who are paying through the neck in a time of a cost of living crisis for high and unreasonably high and needlessly high electricity bills and taxes. I'm talking about people like Twiggy Forrest, Simon Holmes à Court, Mike Cannon-Brookes, Ross Garnaut. These people are making a lot of money off a scam because wind and solar are not cheap. They're highly expensive, much more expensive than coal, and they're living off subsidies. And think about this. Simon Holmes à Court donates money to a fund called Climate 200, to a group called Climate 200. They sponsor the Teals. They sponsor David Pocock, who is a Teal. Now, the Teals pretend to be independents. They're not. They're effectively a party. And they call for subsidies for solar and wind. Is there not a conflict of interest there? To me, it is. A huge conflict of interest. They're funded by someone who's going to make money out of solar and wind subsidies. And they push solar and wind subsidies. Yes, so I'd answer yes to what you're saying, Surreal, but add a few individual billionaires who are making money out of this as well. And the other feature of a parasite is that a parasite kills its host. Okay, Stevie says, at the next election, where will One Nation's preferences be directed? No. We won't be giving any preferences to anyone. All we do is make suggestions on how to vote cards. It is up to you to decide where you vote. So a how to vote card is just a party suggestion. But as you'll find, many One Nation voters are very independent-minded. They don't follow the how to vote card. They put One Nation 1, but then they put Liberal and Labor down the order in the order they think is correct. So what we'll be saying, what I'm going to be saying, is, and I think it'll be based on individual candidates and the quality of the candidates, which is what it should be, as to what One Nation's how to vote will say. How to vote will suggest, not direct, will suggest that I'll be voting One Nation 1, other minor parties. Heart, I think, is now the Informed Medical Options Party, Libertarians, CATA. Who else are the other small parties? United Australia Party is not going to be in the Queensland election. So I'd put them, One Nation 1, then any of those other minor parties, 2, 3, 4, and then the good independents, then the crook independents, then the Liberal Party, then the Labor Party, then the Greens. You might prefer to put the Labor Party ahead of the Liberal Party. That's your choice. I put Liberals ahead of Labor because although their policies are almost identical and they are a uni party, at least in the Liberal Party, a few Liberals stand up. A few Liberals will cross the floor, not in the Labor Party. So the preferences will be going to wherever you want them to go. Stevie? Question from Name Nemeson. Question, what's the greatest threat to Australia? The greatest threat to Australia is citizens doing nothing and allowing our shoddy governance to continue. Every major problem in this country comes from Parliament House in Canberra. Every major problem. Some of the states have major problems, but they're worsened by the federal government. That is the case under both Liberal and Labor. Whether it be destroying our electricity sector. Every major climate and energy policy has been started by the Liberal National Party policy and then been ramped up by the Labor Party. Then when the Liberals come in, they introduce more policies, Labor Party comes in and ramps them up. The greatest threat is an apathetic citizenry that is not doing its job as the keepers of the Constitution and holding the governments accountable, Liberal and Labor governments accountable. As part of that threat, the biggest part of the governance threat is that governments in this country under Liberal and Labor make decisions not based on data. Policies are not based on data. Decisions are not based on data. Legislation is not based on data. Statements are not based on data. They quite often contradict the data, go against it. A few more questions? Thanks, Name Namerson. I'm pleased you liked the answer. Someone said, and the West report? I presume you mean the West Royal Commission. That was a state issue in New South Wales. I've got a post on my website, a story that was done after a lot of investigation, including talking with former Senator Bill Heffernan. You'll see all the details right there laid out. Someone says Labor Party is a cult. Liberal Party is too. I used to vote Liberal. Sometimes I voted Labor, mostly Liberal. Now I've woken up. I started waking up about 10, 14 years ago because I realised they're the same. G'day, Glenn. Thank you very much for listening in. We're going to play my adjournment speech video. It's a 10-minute speech on the British riots and the fact that what's happening in Britain right now in terms of the censorship, the inhuman censorship, has happened on and off for the last 400 years in Britain. It's nothing new, but it happens when governments get too much power, get self-absorbed, and don't take any notice of the public. So please, please stand up, hold your members of Parliament accountable. Thank you for listening in. Thank you. Watching the sad events currently unfolding and underway in the United Kingdom, one could be forgiven for thinking we'd descended into the dystopian world so long predicted in the classic literature. George Orwell's book, 1984, is just one warning, which ironically appears to have become an instruction manual for the political left. An interview with George Orwell was recently surfaced, in which Orwell thought there was a possibility 1984 could happen in the UK. He was right, again. Orwell's description of what looks like the UK under Labour's Keir Starmer reads as follows, quote, "In our world there will be no emotions except fear, anger, rage and self-debasement," which is porn and transgenderism, by the way. Continuing, "There will be no loyalty except to the party, but always there will be the intoxication of power. Always at every moment there will be the thrill of victory, the sensation of trampling on an enemy who is helpless. If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. The moral to be drawn from this nightmare situation is not to let it happen." That's the end of the quote. One Nation are doing everything we can to prevent this nightmare overtaking Australia. Sadly, the globalists, Liberals, Labor, Greens, Nationals and Teals intend to push ahead into hell. Another futuristic essay written in 1961, titled Harrison Bergeron, from American science fiction writer Kurt Vonnegut, predicted a future where human behaviour was controlled, physical movement and appearance and thought. High IQ citizens were punished with earpieces that played loud sounds every 30 seconds to prevent them from thinking, so they did not outshine low IQ people. The strong were literally weighted down with ball bearings to reduce their strength to that of the worst weakling. The attractive were forced to wear ugly masks, so nobody was made to feel uncomfortable gazing upon someone more attractive than themselves. A quote to explain his prediction, which is often incorrectly attributed to Dostoevsky, simply reads, quote, "Tolerance will reach such a level that intelligent people will be banned from thinking so as not to offend the imbeciles," end of quote. Vonnegut's view was mirrored in an interview described to me with a former resident of the Soviet Union, which consisted of the fellow drawing 3 stick figures on a piece of paper, 2 at the same height and 1 taller, then saying, quote, in the Soviet Union, everyone is equal," before taking his pencil and drawing a line across the top of the 2 smaller figures, thereby severing the head of the third. "Such is life in the Soviet Union," he said. Keir Starmer's communism is the victory of those who have lost their humanity, their morality, their faith. Or, as Orwell describes them, those who delight in the thrill of the kill. Perhaps UK citizens would agree it's time to add a footnote to the famous quote from Descartes, "I think, therefore I am," arrested. Just like a young man in Belfast recently who was arrested for observing a protest, only to have Judge Rafferty in the Belfast District Court decide that someone's presence, including as a curious observer, at a disorder involves them in such disorder as to justify the refusal of bail. And off to jail he went. That young man had never been in trouble with the police before and had even left when the event became violent. There's no provision in common or statute law that reads, "Injustice is allowed if it exists to make an example of one to intimidate others into disobedience." Yet here we are. Similar behaviour was observed in Australia during COVID. The conversation around events in the UK has so far missed an important element. The United Kingdom has been here before. Former Queensland Premier Campbell Newman reminded the internet last week of the Areopagitica, which carries the full title of "A Speech of Mr John Milton for the Liberty of Unlicensed Printing to the Parliament of England." This was a pamphlet published in 1644 to protest a parliamentary order the previous year requiring government approval and licensing of all published works and pamphlets. This measure was introduced after Milton's treatise in favour of divorce upset the King, Charles I. History appears to be repeating. The Uni Party's misinformation, disinformation, censorship bill. In Areopagitica, Milton defends the free circulation of ideas as essential to moral and intellectual development. Furthermore, he asserts to attempt to preclude falsehood is to underestimate the power of truth. A lesson for our E-Safety Commissioner, who clearly believes the reverse is true. While the immediate objective of the Areopagitica, repeal of licensing, was not obtained for another 50 years, the tract has earned a permanent place in the literature of human rights. Repeal took 50 years because, as it turned out, each new government kept that power in order to protect themselves from criticism. Power freely given is never freely surrendered. Here we are, 380 years later, and Australia is making exactly the same mistake. Well, One Nation isn't. The rest of the parties in this place are. Keir Starmer famously took the knee during Black Lives Matter riots and now puts English Lives Matter demonstrators on their knees. The spark for this trouble was the murder of 3 young girls at the hands of a suspected Islamic terrorist. If you want to look for the cause of the frustration being demonstrated amongst everyday Brits, look no further than a failure to keep the public safe. It's basic. Fear used as a weapon of control during COVID has bitten the hand that created it. There's an opportunity cost to arresting citizens for thought crimes like praying in public, watching but not participating in a protest, making posts on social media critical of the government, posts which do not incite violence or incite the breaking of a law, posting up first-hand stories of vaccine harm, and, of course, criticising the religion that can't be criticised using nothing but their own words. That opportunity cost is the policing of real crime. Over the last 10 years, according to the UK Statistics Office, assault with grievous bodily harm is up 100%, doubled. Assault with an injury is up 80%, almost doubled. Rape of an adult female up 370%, almost 5 times. Rape of a minor is up 100%. In fact, the conviction rate of rapists in the UK is currently 5%, and not all of those even go to jail. Only last week, a migrant was given a suspended sentence for raping a 13-year-old British girl. The court accepted his defence that he did not know an adult raping a child was against the law in the UK. Imagine being that child's parents. Imagine being that child. Is it any wonder Brits are protesting this two-tiered justice system? The commentariat, who are denying the right of the people to protest peacefully, including many of the usual suspects here in Australia, here in this chamber, are commenting on a world their wealth and elitist lifestyle insulates them from. The Merseyside Chief Constable made the following comment last week, apparently unaware this is the exact upside-down policing, the exact two-tiered policing the public are protesting about. Quote, "What I would say to those people who think they have gotten away with being involved in disorder, we are coming for you. We have hours of social media and closed-circuit TV footage. I have officers working around the clock to identify you. We know who you are and we know where you live and where you work." Now, why is this relevant to Australia? Because our law enforcement have been equipped with the powers to do exactly the same thing. The Identity Verification Services Act, together with the Digital ID Act, which Labor Minister Katie Gallagher passed through the Parliament this year, allows law enforcement to obtain the image of any person, anywhere, anytime, from traffic cameras, security cameras, closed-circuit TV and main roads, even in supermarkets. All this with a spurious suspected of a crime justification. It then allows law enforcement to go through the video, one frame at a time, to extract a photo of each attendee and run them through the National Identity Database, which currently contains data on 17 million Australians. Our police will indeed know your name, address, where you work, live and visit, and once fully implemented, the system will be able to locate you from traffic cameras, payment scanners and shops and public transport touchpads in real time. Welcome to your digital prison. One Nation warned you directly, loudly and often. During the next manufactured social or medical crisis, there's no doubt our law enforcement will commit the same abuse of civil rights as we see happening in the UK right now. One Nation believes human rights should not be made subservient to the greed and hubris of those who would stamp on the face of their fellow citizens in the acquisition of wealth and power, or perversely in the name of social justice. Measures to facilitate this censorship and destruction of human rights is winding our society back to the time of Milton 380 years ago. And the irony is, this is the same left who accused One Nation of wanting to wind the clock back. As a closing remark, let me make it clear, there's no excuse for violence on either side of a protest. No excuse. Equally, the actions of a few do not justify the removal of rights from the many. The actions of the few do not justify the removal of rights from the many. Human rights are universal, part of being human, inherent in each and all of us. from birth.